The torn wedding dress stuck to my sweaty body as the train screeched to a halt at the small Stillwater station. My bare feet touched the wooden platform, and I felt the world spin. The last 48 hours without proper food or sleep were starting to take their toll. My vision blurred, and my legs gave out like dry branches. Please subscribe to the channel and like for more stories like this. I collapsed right there, in the middle of the empty platform, with the distant sound of the train pulling away echoing in my ears. Dust rose around my body and mixed with tears I didn't even know I still had left to cry. The white fabric of the dress, once pristine, now showed stains of dirt, sweat, and desperation. I don't know how long I lay there. Maybe minutes, maybe an eternity. When I opened my eyes, I saw a pair of worn leather boots standing next to me. My gaze slowly traveled up. Work pants, a plaid shirt with rolled-up sleeves, large, calloused hands holding a cowboy hat. Finally, it reached the face of a man in his early 30s, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to carry their own secrets. "Are you hurt?" he asked in a deep but gentle voice, crouching beside me. I tried to speak, but only a hoarse sound came from my parched throat. He extended one of his hands to me, and I accepted it without hesitation. His strength pulled me up with ease, but my legs still trembled. "When was the last time you ate?" he asked, noticing my weakness. I don't remember," I managed to whisper. He didn't ask any more questions. He simply put my arm around his shoulder and helped me walk to a wagon pulled by 2 bay horses. He helped me onto the passenger seat and covered my shoulders with a wool blanket that smelled of wood smoke and open fields. "My name's Samuel," he said as he drove the horses down the town's main street. "Samuel Cross." I opened my mouth to reply, but the words got caught in my throat. What name should I give? My real one, or the one on the crumpled train ticket in my fist? "You don't have to tell me now," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "You look like someone who needs a safe place more than anything." Samuel's ranch was a few miles outside of town, nestled among golden-grassed hills. The house was modest but well-kept, with a porch that wrapped around the entire front. Vegetable gardens grew in neat rows beside it, and a red barn stood out against the darkening sky. He helped me down from the wagon and guided me into the house. Inside, everything was simple but welcoming. Solid wooden furniture, a stone fireplace in the center of the living room, plain fabric curtains on the windows. It smelled of coffee and homemade bread. "The bathroom's over there," he pointed down a hallway. "There's clean water and towels. I'll get something for you to eat." When I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Disheveled hair, a face stained with dust and dried tears, swollen, haunted eyes. The wedding dress, once someone else's dream, now looked more like a shroud. I washed my face and hands as best as I could. Samuel had left a clean shirt and a simple skirt by the door, clothes that must have belonged to some woman who had passed through his life. Putting them on felt like a huge weight lifted from my shoulders. When I came back to the kitchen, he was setting a steaming plate on the table, beef stew with potatoes and carrots, served with fresh bread and butter. My stomach rumbled loud enough for him to hear, and a small smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Eat slow," he advised as I attacked the food like a starving animal. "Your body needs to get used to it again." I obeyed, forcing myself to chew each mouthful. The taste was better than any meal I could remember having. Meanwhile, Samuel busied himself washing dishes, giving me space to eat in peace. "You can stay in the back room for as long as you need," he said after I finished. "It's got a decent bed and privacy. I won't ask questions you're not ready to answer." That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in days, I looked out the window at the stars dotting the black sky. The train ticket was still crumpled in my hand. Margaret Rose Wilson was written there, but that wasn't my name. At least, not really. I woke up the next morning to the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of bacon frying. Samuel was already in the kitchen, making breakfast. When he saw me, he nodded. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," I answered honestly. He placed a plate in front of me, eggs, bacon, toast, and a glass of warm milk. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. "I don't know your story," he said without looking directly at me, "but I recognize someone who's running from something. I've been there." I looked up at him. "And what did you do?" I learned that sometimes running is necessary for survival, but there comes a time when you have to stop running and decide who you want to be. His words echoed in my mind as we finished eating. After breakfast, he showed me around the ranch, the horses grazing in the field, the chickens pecking in the yard, the vegetable patch that provided most of the food we ate. "You can help with whatever you want," he said, "or you can just rest. Everyone needs their own time to heal." I spent the next few days in a quiet routine. I helped in the kitchen, took care of the chickens, and sat on the porch during the twilight. Samuel never pushed for answers, never invaded my space. He was just present, a constant, comforting presence. It was on the third night that I finally managed to talk about some of what had happened. "The dress wasn't mine," I said as we drank coffee on the porch, watching the stars. "I took someone else's place on the train." Samuel showed no surprise. "Someone you knew?" "No. A complete stranger. I saw her name on the ticket, Margaret Rose Wilson. She was going to marry a mail-order groom, but she backed out at the last minute, left everything at the station and walked away. And you decided to go in her place." "I was desperate," I admitted. "I had nowhere to go, no money, no options. I thought anything would be better than—" I trailed off, unable to continue. "Than what you were running from," he finished gently. I nodded, feeling tears burn my eyes. "But when I got here and saw the man who was waiting for me, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake." Samuel leaned forward. "What happened?" "Theodore Kane," the name came out as a bitter whisper. "He took me to his property, talking about how he'd paid good money for a wife and how I should be grateful. When I tried to explain there was a mistake, my voice failed. "He what?" "He said he didn't care what my real name was, that I was his property now, that he had every legal right to me as his promised wife." The words came out like sharp blades. That first night, when he wanted to exercise his marital rights, I broke a bottle over his head and ran. Samuel was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was tight. "How long ago was that?" 3 days before you found me. I walked through the woods, slept outdoors, hid during the day. When I finally reached the station, I had no strength left." He stood up and walked to the porch railing, looking out at the darkness beyond the property. "Does he know where you are?" "I don't think so, but I'm scared he'll find out." Samuel came back and sat beside me. Slowly, he took a ring off his pinky finger, a simple gold band with a small blue stone. "This ring belonged to my mother," he said, holding it out to me. "If anyone comes looking for Margaret Rose Wilson or any other woman, you'll be my wife. That should give you some legal protection." I looked at the ring, then at him. "You'd do that? For a complete stranger?" "You're not a stranger anymore," he replied simply, "and everyone deserves to feel safe." I took the ring, with trembling hands. It was heavier than it looked, carrying the weight of history and meaning. When I put it on my finger, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. "Thank you," I whispered. "What would you like me to call you?" he asked. I thought for a moment. Margaret Rose Wilson was a lie. My real name carried too many painful memories. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "Can I think about it a bit more?" "Sure, when you're ready." That night, for the first time I could remember, I slept deeply without nightmares. Samuel's mother's ring on my finger felt like a talisman against all the fears that had been haunting me. The next morning, I woke to Samuel calling my name from the kitchen. There was an urgency in his voice that made me quickly get dressed and rush to meet him. "Someone's coming down the road," he said, looking out the window. "A man on horseback." My blood ran cold. "Is it him?" Samuel studied the distant figure. "I don't know, but you stay inside until we find out." The rider approached slowly, and we could see he was a young man, maybe my age, with light hair and city clothes. When he stopped in front of the house, Samuel went out to meet him, and I stayed hidden behind the living room window curtain. "Morning," the visitor said, taking off his hat. "I'm looking for a woman who might have passed through here a few days ago. Brown hair, wearing a white wedding dress." My heart pounded, but Samuel's answer was calm. "A lot of folks pass through here. Can I ask why you're looking?" "I'm Margaret Rose Wilson's brother," the young man replied. "I came to deliver an important message for a woman who assumed my sister's identity." Margaret's brother came into the house at Samuel's invitation, and I remained in the kitchen, nervous but curious. He was younger than I had imagined, perhaps 28, with kind eyes that reminded me of someone carrying good news rather than threats. "My sister Margaret is fine," were his first words when he saw me, and I felt a huge wave of relief wash over me. "She married a grain merchant in Denver, a good man who met her at the station when she decided not to come here." I sank heavily into the kitchen chair, feeling as if a gigantic weight had been lifted from my shoulders. "Is she happy?" "Very happy," he replied with a warm smile, "and she wanted me to find you to thank you. Margaret said you probably saved her life by taking her place on that train." Samuel poured coffee for all of us, and Margaret's brother, who introduced himself as James Wilson, continued his story. Margaret told me about Theodore Kane and the kind of man he really is. She had discovered terrible things about him through letters from other women in the area. Stories about how he treated the people who worked for him, about his violence when he drank, about what happened to his first wife. "What happened to the first wife?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. "She died under suspicious circumstances," James said darkly. "Officially, it was an accident, a fall down the stairs, but folks in town whispered other things. Margaret found out about it the day before the trip and panicked. A chill ran down my spine. So she really was in danger." "Both of you were," James confirmed. "Theodore Kane isn't the kind of man who takes rejection or being fooled lightly. Margaret is worried about your safety and wanted me to bring you this." He pulled a thick envelope from the inside pocket of his coat. "There's enough money here for you to start a new life anywhere you want to go. Margaret insists you deserve it after what you've been through." I looked at the envelope, then at Samuel, who was watching everything in silence. "That's very generous of her, but I can't accept it." "Why not?" James asked. "Because I didn't do it for money. I did it because I was desperate and out of options. And now—" I looked around the cozy kitchen at Samuel, who had offered me safety without asking for anything in return. "Now I've found a place where I can try to rebuild my life." James studied my face for a moment, then looked at Samuel. "You two seem to have found something special here." "We hope so," Samuel said, and the way he spoke made my heart quicken. "Well," James said, putting the envelope back in his coat, "Margaret also asked me to give you a message. She wants you to know that no matter what name you choose to use, you'll always be welcome in our family. If you ever need anything, you can find us in Denver." After James left, Samuel and I sat on the porch, watching his figure disappear down the dusty road. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink, and I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. "How do you feel?" Samuel asked. "Relieved," I answered honestly. For a long time, I carried the guilt of having stolen Margaret's identity. Knowing she's okay and that she was actually grateful, it's like a huge weight has been lifted from my shoulders. "And now, what do you want to do?" I looked at him, at this man who had taken me in without asking questions, who had offered me protection and kindness when I needed it most. "I want to stop running." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened, about the choices I had made and the ones I still needed to make. Around midnight, I got up and walked to the kitchen for a glass of water. Samuel was sitting at the table, writing by candlelight. When he saw me, he looked up. "Can't sleep either?" "Too much on my mind," I admitted, sitting across from him. "What are you writing?" "Letters to some friends in other towns, asking if they've heard anything about Theodore Kane. I want to know exactly what kind of man we're dealing with." The concern in his voice touched me deeply. "You don't have to do that for me." "Yes, I do," he said firmly. "You're under my protection now. That means something to me." We were silent for a few minutes, just the sound of his pen scratching paper and the ticking clock on the wall. Finally, Samuel put his pen down and looked directly at me. "Can I ask you a personal question?" "Sure." "What were you running from before you assumed Margaret's identity? You don't have to tell me the details, but was it something family-related?" I sighed deeply. It was a question I knew would come eventually, and Samuel had been so patient that he deserved at least part of the truth. "My father promised me in marriage to a man who was similar to Theodore Kane, violent, controlling, old enough to be my father. When I tried to refuse, my father said I had no choice, that the family needed the money the marriage would bring. Samuel frowned. And your mother? She died when I was 16. After that, my father started drinking more, owing money to dangerous people. He saw my marriage as a way to pay off his debts. So you ran. The night before the wedding, I took the little money I'd saved working as a seamstress and ran. But the money didn't last long, and I was getting desperate when I saw Margaret leave the train ticket at the station. Samuel reached across the table and gently touched my hand. You were very brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified. Sometimes they're the same thing. The next morning, I woke up determined to do something I'd been thinking about for days. I found Samuel in the barn, tending to the horses, and asked him to come to the house with me. I need to burn some things, I said, picking up the torn wedding dress that had been stored in my room's wardrobe. Samuel didn't ask questions, just helped me carry the dress and the fake documents to a safe spot behind the house, away from anything that could catch fire. He built a small bonfire and stood beside me as I watched the flames dance. Are you sure? He asked. Absolutely sure. I threw the dress into the fire first. The white fabric twisted and darkened, the delicate lace disappearing into smoke. It was strange how something that once represented hope and new beginnings now symbolized lies and escape. Next, I burned the documents with Margaret Rose Wilson's name. I watched the letters vanish in the flames, taking with them the last physical connection to that false identity. How do you feel? Samuel asked as we watched the last traces turn to ash. Free, I replied, and I realized it was true. For the first time in a long time, I feel truly free. We spent the rest of the morning working together in the garden, planting seeds that would grow in the coming seasons. There was something deeply symbolic about putting down roots, literally, in this place that had become my refuge. Samuel, I said as we watered the seedlings, can I ask you about your family? About how you ended up here alone? He stopped working for a moment, looking at the distant hills. My parents died of fever when I was 22. I inherited this ranch, but I also inherited their debts. I spent over a decade working to pay everything off. And you never thought of getting married? I did. Even got engaged once, about 5 years ago. But she decided ranching life was too hard, too lonely. She left for the big city with a merchant she met. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was for the best. I learned it's better to be alone than with someone who doesn't really want to be here. I looked at him, at this man who had given me shelter and protection without expecting anything in return. And now, do you still prefer to be alone? He turned to look at me, and I saw something new in his eyes, a tenderness that made my heart quicken. No, he said simply, not now. That afternoon, as we prepared dinner together, I felt a strange sensation, like I was truly home for the first time in my adult life. It wasn't just the physical place, but the person I was sharing this space with. Samuel, I said as he chopped vegetables and I stirred the soup on the stove, I want to tell you my real name. He stopped chopping and looked at me. Are you sure? I am. My birth name is Rebecca. Rebecca, no last name, because I never felt connected to my father's last name after everything he did. Rebecca, he repeated, as if tasting the name. It suits you. You think so? I do. It's a strong name like you. That night, sitting on the porch as we had on previous nights, I talked more about my past life than I had since arriving. I always dreamed of being a teacher, I confessed. Before everything fell apart, I used to teach the neighborhood children to read and write. I loved seeing their faces when they finally understood a difficult word or could read an entire sentence on their own. Stillwater could use a teacher, Samuel said thoughtfully. The school closed 2 years ago when the last teacher moved away. Kids have to travel miles to study in the next town. Do you think they'd accept me, a woman with no proven past? If you're married to a respectable rancher in the area, I think so. The words hung in the air between us. It wasn't exactly a marriage proposal, but it was the closest suggestion of one I'd ever received from someone who truly mattered to me. Samuel, I said carefully, are you suggesting our arrangement become real? I'm suggesting we stop pretending it's just for protection, he replied, his voice low and sincere. At least on my part. My heart was beating so fast, I was sure he could hear it. On my part, it's not just protection either. We were silent for a long moment, letting the words settle between us. Then Samuel stood up and extended his hand to me. Want to go for a walk? I accepted his hand and he led me away from the house toward a small creek that ran through his property. The moon was full, illuminating the path and making the water shimmer like liquid silver. This has always been my favorite spot on the property, he said as we sat on the creek bank. I come here when I need to think, when I might need to make important decisions. What kind of decisions? Like asking you to stay, not just for safety, but because, he paused, searching for the right words, because this house has come alive again since you arrived. I've come alive again. I turned to look at him directly. Samuel, I don't want you to feel like you have to save me or take care of me out of pity. It's not pity, he said firmly. It's love. I've fallen in love with you, Rebecca, for your strength, for your kindness, for the way you find beauty in small things, even after everything you've been through. The words I had desperately wished to hear, but never thought I would hear from someone like Samuel. Someone good, someone who saw me as a complete person and not as something to be owned. I've fallen in love with you too, I admitted, but I'm scared. Of what? That Theodore Kane will show up and destroy all of this, that my past will catch up to us and ruin your life. Samuel took my hands in his. Rebecca, look at me. No matter what happens, we'll face it together. You're not alone anymore. It was at that moment I heard it, the distant sound of horses galloping toward the property. Samuel heard it too, and instantly tensed. Stay here, he said, starting to get up. No, I held his arm. If it's him, I'm not hiding anymore. I'm tired of running. We walked back to the house together, and when we reached the front yard, we saw 3 men on horseback standing there. Even in the dim moonlight, I immediately recognized the robust, threatening silhouette of Theodore Kane. Where's my wife? He yelled as soon as he saw us. Samuel stepped forward, placing himself partially between me and Theodore. There's no wife of yours here. Theodore dismounted, followed by the 2 men he had brought with him. Don't lie to me, rancher. I know the girl who stole Margaret Rose Wilson's identity is here. She belongs to me by legal right. She doesn't belong to anyone, Samuel said calmly, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. She does, Theodore bellowed, and I could smell whiskey even from where I stood. I paid good money for a wife, and I'm taking what's mine. It was then that I stepped forward, coming out from Samuel's protection. My whole body trembled, but my voice came out firm and clear. I'm not Margaret Rose Wilson, and I'm not your property. Theodore looked at me with bloodshot eyes and a cruel smile. I don't care what your real name is, sweetie. You came to be my wife, and that's what you'll be. No, I said simply, I won't. You have no choice, he roared, taking a step toward me. Samuel moved instantly, blocking Theodore's path. She has every right to choose, and she chose to stay here. Get out of my way, Theodore threatened, reaching for the revolver on his hip. I won't move, Samuel said firmly, and I suggest you and your men go back where you came from before this gets worse for everyone. Theodore laughed bitterly. You think you can intimidate me? I brought help. The 2 men he had brought dismounted their horses, but I could see they were uncomfortable with the situation. They weren't professional gunmen, just farmhands who had probably been persuaded with promises of easy money. Theodore, I said, taking another step forward despite the fear I felt. You don't really want me. You want someone you can control, someone who's afraid of you. I'm not that person. You'll learn to be, he said in a dangerously low voice. No, I won't. Because now I know the difference between a real man and a coward who has to buy a wife because no woman would stay with him by choice. Theodore's eyes narrowed dangerously, and he took another step toward me. You'll regret talking to me like that. Maybe, I replied, surprising myself with my own courage, but at least I'll regret it as a free woman, not as your prisoner. It was then that Samuel spoke, again, his voice carrying an authority I hadn't heard before. Mr. Kane, I'm giving you one last chance to leave peacefully. The woman you're looking for doesn't exist anymore. Rebecca is my wife now, and she's under my protection. If you try to take her by force, you'll have to kill me first. Theodore looked from Samuel to me, and I could see the calculations happening in his drunken mind. He was clearly considering his options, weighing the risks against his anger and wounded pride. "This isn't over," he said finally, but he was already backing away toward his horse. "Nobody makes a fool of me and gets away with it." "It is over," Samuel said calmly. "And if you come back here, you'll find I'm not the only one around who doesn't take kindly to men who mistreat women." Theodore mounted his horse with jerky, angry movements. "You'll pay for this, rancher. Both of you will pay." With that, he and his companions galloped off, leaving a cloud of dust in the yard. Samuel and I stood there for several minutes, listening to the sound of the horses fading until it finally disappeared in the distance. Only then did I realize I was trembling violently. Samuel wrapped his arms around me, and I felt all the adrenaline from the confrontation finally leave me. "It's over," he murmured against my hair. "You were incredibly brave." "I was terrified," I admitted, my voice muffled against his chest. "Courage isn't not being afraid. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear." We stood there embracing in the yard for a long time, under the moonlight and stars, and I knew I had finally stopped running. No matter what Theodore Kane did or tried to do in the future, I would no longer be defined by his fear or any other man's. "Samuel," I said finally, pulling back a little to look into his eyes. "Did you mean it when you said I'm your wife?" "I meant every word I said to him," he replied. "The question is whether you want it to be true." I looked at this man who had offered me shelter when I was lost, protection when I was vulnerable, and love when I thought I'd never be loved. The answer seemed obvious. "I want it to be true," I said. "I want it to be real." He smiled then, the first genuine, carefree smile I had seen on his face since we met. "Then let's make it real." The morning after the confrontation with Theodore Kane, I woke up with a strange sense of calm. The sun streamed through the bedroom window, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air like tiny diamonds. For the first time I could remember, I didn't feel that familiar tightness in my chest that always accompanied my first moments of consciousness. There was no more fear coursing through my veins, no more urgent need to look over my shoulder or plan my next escape. Samuel was already awake. I could hear the sound of his boots in the hallway and the smell of fresh coffee coming from the kitchen. I quickly got dressed and went to find him, eager to discuss the events of the previous night and what they meant for our future. "How did you sleep?" he asked when he saw me, his eyes searching for signs of trauma or anxiety on my face. "Better than I expected," I answered honestly. I think finally accepting the confrontation instead of running from it brought me a peace I didn't expect to feel. He nodded, pouring coffee into 2 ceramic mugs. Sometimes facing our fears is the only way to free ourselves from them. We sat at the kitchen table, and for a few minutes we drank our coffee in contemplative silence. The morning light streamed through the windows, banishing the shadows that had seemed so menacing the night before. "Samuel," I said finally, "last night you said I'm your wife. But legally, that's not true. If we really want to start a life together, we need to do it the right way. What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we have a real wedding, not out of fear or for protection, but because we choose to be together." He placed his mug on the table and looked directly at me. "Are you sure I'm not pressuring you because of what happened with Theodore?" "I'm absolutely sure," I replied firmly. "For the first time in my life, I'm making a choice because I want to, not because I'm forced by circumstances." A slow smile spread across Samuel's face. "Then let's get married, for real, with witnesses and everything necessary to make it legal in the eyes of the law." "But first," I said, standing up from the table, "there's one thing I need to do." I walked to the desk in the corner of the room where Samuel kept his important papers. I picked up a blank sheet of paper and a pen, then returned to the table. "What are you going to do?" he asked, curious. "I'm going to choose my name, officially this time." I put the pen to paper and began to write in careful letters, Rebecca Marie Thompson. I looked at the words for a moment, testing how they made me feel. "Rebecca, because it's who I really am," I explained. "Marie, in honor of your mother, who gave me protection through her ring, even after she was gone. And Thompson, because," I paused, searching for the right words. Because I want a name that represents strength and self-determination. Thompson sounds like someone who builds their own life, who doesn't let the past define them. Samuel looked at the paper with a touched expression. Rebecca Marie Thompson, he repeated. It's perfect. So this will be my name when we get married. Not Margaret Rose Wilson. Not any other name I carried out of necessity. Rebecca Marie Thompson, chosen by myself. That afternoon, we went to town to speak with Reverend Mitchell about performing our wedding ceremony. He was a kind, middle-aged man who had known Samuel for years and didn't ask difficult questions about my past or about how quickly we had decided to marry. I can perform the ceremony next Sunday, he said after we explained our wishes. We'll need 2 witnesses, and you'll have to sign the legal documents. We can ask the Hendersons to be our witnesses, Samuel suggested, referring to the closest neighbors. They're good people and can keep secrets when necessary. We also visited the county clerk's office to officially register my new name. The clerk was an elderly, efficient man who filled out the necessary documents without commenting on my lack of prior SAP documentation. Lots of folks start new lives out west, he said simply when I signed the papers. What matters is who you choose to be from here on out. During the week that followed, we prepared for our simple but meaningful ceremony. Samuel cleaned and organized the house while I prepared a simple dress, light blue, made of fabric we bought at the general store in town. There was nothing elaborate about our preparations, but every detail carried a special weight because it represented genuine choices. Are you nervous? Samuel asked on the eve of the wedding as we finished tidying the room where we would receive our guests after the ceremony. A little, I admitted. But not the bad kind of nervous. It's more like anticipation. Like when you're about to start an adventure you've always wanted to live. I know exactly what you mean. On the morning of our wedding, I woke before dawn. I couldn't go back to sleep, so I got up and went to the kitchen window to watch the sun rise over the hills. There was something deeply symbolic about starting this new chapter of my life with the sunrise. It was as if the world itself was celebrating a new beginning. Samuel appeared a few minutes later, also unable to sleep. We stood side by side at the window, watching the sky change from dark purple to soft pink and finally to brilliant gold. Ready? He asked, when the sun finally appeared completely on the horizon. More than ready. The ceremony was held in Stillwater's small wooden church. The Hendersons arrived punctually, bringing wildflowers that Mrs. Henderson had gathered from her property. Reverend Mitchell awaited us at the altar, his prayer book open and a warm smile on his face. When I reached the altar beside Samuel, I looked into his eyes and saw reflected in them the same certainty I felt in my heart. This was not a marriage of convenience or desperation. This was a marriage of choice, love, and hope. Dearly beloved, Reverend Mitchell began, we are gathered here today to unite Samuel Cross and Rebecca Marie Thompson in holy matrimony. It is a union based on love, mutual respect, and the shared desire to build a life together. The words flowed around me, but my attention was focused on Samuel and the depth of emotion I saw on his face. When it was time for the vows, he took my hands in his and spoke in a clear, firm voice. Rebecca, I promise to love you not despite your strength, but because of it. I promise to support your dreams, respect your choices, and stand by your side in any storm we may face. I promise never to try to change you or control you, but rather to grow alongside you as an equal partner. When it was my turn, the words poured from my heart without hesitation. Samuel, I promise to love you with the truest and bravest version of myself. I promise to build a life that honors both my past and our future. I promise to be your partner in joy and in hardship, and never again run from life's challenges when I can face them by your side. When Reverend Mitchell declared us husband and wife and Samuel kissed me, I felt as if all the weight of the previous years had finally been lifted from my shoulders. This kiss was not marked by fear or pressure. It was pure love and choice. After the ceremony, we returned to the ranch, where the Hendersons joined us for a simple but celebratory meal. Mrs. Henderson had baked a cake, and Mr. Henderson brought a bottle of wine he had saved for special occasions. To Samuel and Rebecca, he said, raising his glass, may you find all the happiness you deserve. During the meal, we talked about plans for the future. Samuel mentioned his idea about me becoming the town teacher, and Mrs. Swan Henderson was visibly excited. The children in the area desperately need a proper education, she said. It would be wonderful to have a school running again. Do you really think they'd accept me? I asked, still unsure how the community would react to a woman with a mysterious past. My dear, Mrs. Henderson said with a maternal smile, in this territory, we all come from somewhere and leave something behind. What matters is who you are now and what you can contribute. Her words gave me a confidence I didn't know I needed. For the first time, I began to seriously imagine a future where I could use my education to help others, where I could have a purpose beyond mere survival. After our guests left, Samuel and I were alone as husband and wife for the first time. There was no nervousness or anxiety, just a deep sense of finally being home. How do you feel, Mrs. Thompson? He asked with a playful smile. I feel like I've just been born, I answered honestly. Like my whole previous life was just a preparation for this moment. That night, sitting on our porch, as we had so many times before, but now as husband and wife, we talked about our dreams for the future. I want our home to be a place where lost people can find safety, I said, like you did for me. And I want it to be a place where children can grow up with love and education, Samuel replied. Maybe our own children someday. The mention of children made me smile. For the first time, I could imagine bringing children into the world in an environment of love and stability instead of fear and uncertainty. Do you think you'd be a good father? I asked. I hope so. I know you'd be a wonderful mother. Weeks passed, then months, and our life settled into a happy and productive routine. I began tutoring some of the neighborhood children, and word quickly spread. Soon, parents from all over the area were bringing their children to learn from me. Samuel converted one of the smaller rooms in the house into a proper classroom, with small desks and a blackboard we ordered from the big city. Seeing those young minds absorbing knowledge brought me a joy I hadn't experienced since before all the troubles began in my previous life. Teacher Thompson, one of my 8-year-old students, a girl named Lucy, said, "Can you teach us about other places in the world?" Of course, Lucy. What place would you like to learn about? About places where women can be teachers and doctors and anything they want to be. Her question touched me deeply. Here was a child who already understood that possibilities for women could be limited, but who dreamed of more. There are many places like that, I said, and more places are becoming like that. And you know what? You can help make this place one of those places too. A year after our wedding, I received an unexpected letter. At first, when I saw the envelope addressed to Rebecca Thompson, I felt a moment of panic. Who could be looking for me? But when I opened and read it, I discovered it was from Margaret Rose Wilson, now Margaret Patterson. Dear Rebecca, the letter read, I hope this letter finds you happy and prosperous. James told me about your marriage and how you've settled in Stillwater. I'm so happy to know you've found true love and a new life. I'm also writing to inform you that Theodore Kane will no longer be a problem for anyone. He was arrested for assaulting a merchant in a neighboring town and is serving a 5-year prison sentence. Additionally, several women in the area finally found the courage to report his past abuses. My husband and I would like to visit you someday if you are willing to receive us. I feel I owe you so much for saving me from a terrible fate, and I would like to meet the woman who was so brave when I couldn't be. With affection and gratitude, Margaret Patterson, née Wilson. The news about Theodore Kane brought me a relief I didn't know I still needed. For months, a small part of me had remained on edge, expecting him to return. Now, finally, that chapter was truly closed. I showed the letter to Samuel, who smiled as he read it. Looks like you helped more people than you realized, he said. What do you mean? The other women who reported Theodore, you facing him that night, probably gave them the courage to speak out about their own abuses. The idea that my decision to stop running had helped other women find their own courage filled me with a sense of purpose that went beyond my own happiness. 2 years after our arrival in Stillwater, the official town school reopened with Rebecca Thompson as the head teacher. The inauguration ceremony was an event for the entire community, with families coming from miles away to celebrate. When I arrived here, I said in my short speech to the assembled crowd, I was a person with no name, no past, no defined future. This community gave me the chance to choose who I wanted to be. Now I hope I can give the children of this region the tools so they too can choose who they want to be. That night, Samuel and I walked around the property, observing the changes we had made over the years. What started as a temporary refuge had transformed into a true home, complete with a thriving garden, an expanded barn, and even a small orchard we planted together. "Do you regret anything?" Samuel asked as we stopped near the creek where we had so many important conversations. I thought carefully before answering. I don't regret anything that brought me here. Not even the painful parts, because they taught me to value what I have now. And what do you have now? A name I chose, a life I built, a husband who loves me for who I really am, and a purpose that fulfills me more than I ever dreamed possible. 3 years after our wedding, our daughter was born. During labor, holding Samuel's hand as the midwife worked, I thought of all the journeys that had brought me to this moment. The physical pain of childbirth seemed insignificant compared to the emotional pains I had overcome to get here. When the midwife placed our daughter in my arms, I looked at her tiny face and knew immediately what her name would be. "Grace," I whispered. "Grace Marie Thompson." Grace because she represents the grace that transformed our lives. I explained to Samuel, who had tears in his eyes as he looked at our daughter. "Marie, in honor of your mother, who protected us even after her death. And Thompson, because she is the fruit of the life we chose to build together." Holding Grace on that first day, I made a silent promise to her. I promised that she would grow up knowing she had the power to choose her own path, that she would never be anyone's property, that her voice would always be heard and respected. I promised that she would know the difference between true love and possession, between strength and violence. "She'll know who she is from the very beginning," Samuel said, as if reading my thoughts. "She'll never have to search for her identity like you did. And if someday she wants to change her name or choose a different path than we expect, we'll support her," I replied, "because the freedom of choice is the greatest gift we can give her." In the months that followed, our home filled with new sounds. Grace's crying, her first laughs, the sounds of a real family. The school continued to thrive, and I had developed a special program to teach girls about their rights and possibilities, always remembering Lucy's question about places where women could be anything. One afternoon, as Grace slept in her crib and I corrected student lessons, I found an essay by one of my older students, a 14-year-old girl named Sarah. The title was, "The Woman I Want to Be." "I want to be like Teacher Thompson," she had written. "I want to be someone who chooses her own name, who doesn't let other people decide who she should be. I want to be strong enough to help other people find their own strength." Tears filled my eyes as I read her words. Seeing that my story, even without knowing all the details, had inspired this young woman to think about her own autonomy and power, showed me that my journey had served a greater purpose. That night, after Samuel returned from work and we had dinner together as a family, we sat on the porch as we always did. Grace was sleeping in my arms, and the sound of her soft breathing mingled with the night sounds of the farm. "Can you imagine what she'll be like when she grows up?" Samuel asked, watching our daughter. "I imagine she'll be exactly who she chooses to be," I replied, "and we'll be here to support her, no matter what she chooses." I looked at the ledger that was on the table beside us, the same book where I had first written Rebecca Marie Thompson. Now it contained not only my name, but the record of our marriage and Grace's birth certificate. "You know," I said, "sometimes I think about the woman I was when I arrived here. She was so lost, so scared. If she could see where we are now..." "She'd be proud," Samuel said firmly, "because all of this was only possible because of her courage. The courage to run when she needed to run, and the courage to stop running when she found something worth fighting for." As the stars appeared in the night sky, I reflected on the complete journey. From that desperate night when I assumed Margaret Rose Wilson's identity to this moment of complete peace and fulfillment. It had been a long and difficult road full of fears and uncertainties, but each step had brought me closer to who I truly was. The name Rebecca Marie Thompson was not just an identity I had chosen. It was a declaration of independence, an affirmation that I had the right to define myself. And now, holding my daughter Grace, I knew I had not only found my own identity, but created a legacy of strength and choice that would pass to the next generation. Please subscribe to the channel and like for more stories like this. The runaway bride who had collapsed at Stillwater train station no longer existed. In her place was a woman who knew exactly who she was, what she was worth, and the transformative power of choosing love instead of fear. And that transformation, I knew, was just the beginning of a story that would continue through Grace and all the lives we had the privilege to touch.